You might have seen WebDevCody's video, Goodbye JavaScript, or you might have seen Primogen's reaction to it because he thought the video was great. I had some reservations. That said, so did Cody, and he just put out a new video. This video is titled, Hello JavaScript, Oh How I've Missed You, and I am genuinely really excited to watch this. Important thing about Cody is that he has been an awesome, I don't even want to say community member because he's more than that. He really understood what we were doing here day zero and was like one of the first big T3 stack proponents. He also changed his content up a bit after some conversations that we had. And one of the things he changed is where he puts his face in the videos and the specific mask he uses for it. I love that. I'm not trying to make anything I do with my content proprietary. I'm not saying he copied me. I'm saying he took the right parts of what I was doing and applied them in a really logical way. That said, it means that it won't fit with my face and his. So we're going to bring in my Twitch chat to plug the gap. Let's see what Cody has to say here, because I am very excited to hear what has brought him back to JavaScript.
So I feel kind of dumb making this video, and I was honestly just gonna like not even make this video and just let my slow transition back to Next.js. But I figured maybe y'all can just hear my perspective on the Go HTMX journey I went on for 2 weeks. So 2 weeks ago, I made a video called Goodbye JavaScript. It got a lot more views than I was expecting. And also the Primogen reacted to it, which I was actually psyched about. I appreciate you reacting to my video. But with that all being said, and all the complaining that I did in that video about like the performance of my node server eating up memory and how Go is like so much more performant and just simpler to create a bundle with, as I started coding with Go and HTMX and Temple, there's just so much stuff I ran into. And I realized that I would rather have a hit in performance if I have a good developer experience. And so this video, I'm going to
not just developer experience, user experience too. He had some real good points about the user experience failures inherent with HTMX that we will be riffing on in a bit, don't you worry. But yeah, I love the fact that he did this whole journey publicly. I've explored things like this before, but I never had the balls to publicly share all of the steps and all of the chaos I went through. The fact that he went through this all publicly and brought us with him during the journey is so cool. And also, there's an instinct to grift. When you get the support that he was getting from Primogen in the Go and HTMX community, it's very easy to ignore your better judgment and just be part of that because you're getting so much positivity and reinforcement. And he didn't do that. Chat's already saying it, he's one of the most honest people in the space. Like, as unbiased as they come. I have so much respect for him and how he's thought of development, how he's changed the way he writes code, and how he has shared all of these things with us in such a uniquely honest way. It's super cool. Massive respect.
I'm going to talk about some of the things I ran into when coding with Go, Temple, HTMX, and things that I'm just like, I don't really like this. I'd rather just switch back to Next.js. Maybe it's because I'm just a JavaScript developer and I'm familiar with Next.js, and so my opinions are probably going to be biased. Secondly, it's also because I'm using VS Code. A lot of these complaints are because I'm using VS Code and not NeoVim. But let me just list out some of the things that bothered me about Go and Temple, and I would say these concerns like impacted me enough where I just felt a relief coding in Next.js again. So let's talk about some of these things, and you guys can leave comments. I know you guys are going to leave comments and be angry because I'm not embracing Go fully.
That's what we're here for. HTMX is awesome, and I have so much respect for it. But Next is also awesome, and I have a lot of respect for it. So we'll provide the positivity this time, Cody. You deserve it.
Let's talk about the good about Go. I'm not writing Go off. I think Go is a very simple language to learn. I think it's very performant, like I mentioned before, but at the same time, it's very verbose. I miss my string interpolations. Like I'm noticing I have to do a lot of format, printf. Let's see where I'm doing that. Printfs. Okay, I'm doing a lot of format printfs just to interpolate a string. It's not that big of a deal, but it's enough where I'm like, dude, it's just kind of annoying that I can't just say like user subscribed email. Okay, this is more concise than this. And when you write this enough throughout your application, you start missing it in Next.js. Okay, not a big deal. It's not a deal breaker, but again, it's just the little things, and the little things add up.
I'll steelman the other side here. There's a lot of little things in JavaScript that you just get used to when you write it enough that are really dumb. Is the amount of code it takes to do something in Go twice as much as in JavaScript? Yes, but also it's very consistent, which is nice. And I just wanted to call out there's a balance here for sure. And I could hear the argument either side for the language part here at the very least. Although if you're doing a lot of string formatting, a language that doesn't have good string functions built in is hell. And JavaScript's string manip stuff is one of the few things that JavaScript's standard library actually does decently well.
I think the error handling in Go is light years better than Node. When you are calling a node function, you have no idea if it could even throw an exception. And you need to make sure you are putting try catches at least somewhere up higher in your application so you can handle when whatever arbitrary function you call throws an exception.
The error management's super real. I just published a video about try catch, and there are so many catches, pun intended, in how JavaScript does error handling. And yes, Go does that much better.
Obscure. You don't know what the function's going to do. In Go, the errors are returned. And so when you call a function, usually you know just by looking at the function definition that, hey, this thing could potentially error out. You probably want to handle it. Now, granted, this can be ignored. Like, I don't actually have to handle the errors, right? So just like wrap this whole thing in a try catch, bubble the error up to the user, tell the user to try again, that type of sloppy coding, right? So there is a lot of benefit to the error handling in Go, and I'm definitely going to give it the win there. But I will say that it gets a little verbose at times. And I'm like, dude, if I can't write to my database, like, I just want this thing to error out. Like right here, I just want this thing to panic. Now, granted, there are some errors that you actually want to check and make sure that, like, hey, if this was just like a connection reset error or a connection timed out error when trying to write to my database or trying to make a fetch request to a third-party API, then yeah, maybe I could just wrap it and retry logic in my Go app and do something different based on that error. But there's something nice about Node.js, and like I can just hack stuff together, and like if it just throws an error, whatever, like the UI will show an alert saying try again. And again, this is from an indie hacker standpoint. This isn't
there's so many little things he just said that I like could riff on for hours. I'm going to resist the urge to, but the fact that he called out his perception as an indie hacker is really important. The fact that he's qualifying his experience with his biases. That's something I've been trying to do more, and I have a lot of respect for him for how well he did it there. T3 Stack was the first time I tried something and felt the productivity gains within a few hours of using it. It was an obvious choice over making a separate REST API in Node and then some random single-page app in React. It simplified enough for me that I switched to using it. Then App Router came out with Next, and I started using that. Again, I felt more productivity gains with server components and server actions. Basically removed my need for tRPC, since I could get my end-to-end type safety directly inside of Next. Sure, I complained about some rough edges. I have too, there's quite a few of them. But overall, it was a net positive for my needs. I still had to use random things like SQS and Lambda to do async processing, and find solutions to notify the UI when those jobs finished. Then I started using Convex for my backend, and again, felt productivity gains within a few hours or less. I no longer needed to think about where to store files or where to kick off long-running tasks. That said, there's a cool place to store files if you need to do that. Check out Upload if you haven't. Really proud of the overhaul that we've been working on. God, the site is fucking beautiful. I might have to film a video about how we made this so much more performant. I already filmed some like demos, but remind me later, I'll probably do that. Best way to upload files in Next for sure. Anyways, no longer to worry about your hosting for your database, implementing update logic in the front end when async job's finished, etc. Convex sounds cool. I should look into it more. With the amount of complexity that I've seen on my day job, I'm always eager to find a simpler way to build an application as a one-man team. I know people will chime in with try Nuxt, try Svelte, try SQLite, try X, Y, or Z. I've tried enough things where if I don't see an immediate productivity gain within a few hours, I'm not interested. I'm not looking for different implementation details. I'm looking for innovation. Such a banger. I love this so much. This was fantastic. He got accused of just glazing me a bunch. I saw so many people who had me blocked in the replies. And as Cody said, people hate productivity. Yeah, it's annoying. There's two types of different dev, build it fast and build it right. What's fun about my stack is that it's a build it fast stack that isn't wrong. Like, if anything, building something with Wasm and Zig, or Wasm and Rust even, would be so much harder to maintain, so much harder to build in a way where everything behaves how the users expect. It's harder to build right with this tech. The build it fast tech, and I should probably do a whole video about this. Building faster doesn't mean you're building more wrong. If the tools you have let you iterate faster, you can get to right at a faster pace. If your tools are slow, it doesn't increase the likelihood the code comes out correct. But if your tools are fast, it does inherently increase the likelihood that you can get to the correct place in the future. And with tools like the T3 stack, like Next and App Router, with these things, there might be gotchas. I'm not saying there aren't, but the fact that you can iterate as fast as you can means that you can get to the correct place much faster, because correctness and speed are not related, and people like to pretend they are. There is no guaranteed relationship there at all. So that's my counter here. Back to this.
I'm working at a Fortune 500 company. I need to make sure every single error is handled. This is more of the context of my mindset of what I want to achieve in my spare time after work. Handling all these errors is just something I just don't care about. But again, I'm going to give Go the win on that because I do think it's a better way to handle errors. I hear Rust is also really great at that too. Stuff like this, parsing an int, it's just so verbose. Now, granted, I am new to Go and there might be better ways to do this, but like the fact that I'm passing in an email and then I just need to convert it to a string, and then this could potentially throw an error. So now I need to say, oh, if it throws an error, I need to panic. Granted, I don't even know if Fiber is going to return the correct status code when this thing errors. So I don't think I'm doing this right either. I should probably have like a higher order function that's wrapping all this to catch errors and maybe change the status code and return that. I think the proper way to do this would be like c.send status of, I don't know, 500 or something. I'm sorry, it's fiber dot, I don't know, bad request. So that's what I should be doing instead. But I feel like it would just be nicer if instead maybe I could just like not catch these errors. But I think if I do this, then like this thing won't panic. Like it'll just call this, and this would probably throw an error at some point, and then like I don't know. Anyway, let me move on from that because my lack of Go is shining through, and you guys are going to call me out in the comments, but I just don't care. Let's go to the temple syntax. Temple, there's something about temple that I just don't like. All right, when I'm making an endpoint, often I wish I could just write a simple template right here.
There's a point here I actually have to riff on a little bit, which is the editor experience. I find a lot of other languages don't prioritize this anywhere near highly enough. The example he just gave was command click to get to the code here. So he command clicked. I'll just play it out.
And I wish I could just write is when I command click on a template, it takes me to my compiled generated Go file, which is completely pointless to load up. And so then I end up going over here and I'm like, okay, well, I opened the wrong file. Let me click on this one and let me try to find the function I was originally trying to look for. Okay, here it is. And that disconnect in my editor is enough for me to say, I do not want to use temple.
Yep. It's a bold statement to say, I'm not using this technology because it makes navigating my editor harder. And I know people are going to be pissed about that one in the comments. I don't care. He's right. One of the biggest wins TRPC had was when they did the overhaul with V10 that lets you command click from the front end to the back end. This is for a project I made for managing images for us creator folks. Here I have a hook that is an infinite query. So this is a paginated query. API.image.getPaginated.images.useInfiniteQuery. If I want to see the backend code for this is a front end component. Use client, this component runs on the front end. I want to see where this data is coming from. I can command click on the paginated images here. And here is the backend code. This is a server file. Here is the server code where I do the DB query and return the thing. The fact that I can go from this front end component, this UI that I wrote, and just command click to the backend code is unbelievable. It seems silly, but I promise you, once you have a workflow that allows for something like this, you can't go back. The wording this point is hard, but the way that everything feels so interconnected makes debugging, makes changing, makes updating, makes working, makes code reviewing, all just so much better. And I hate when I work in technologies that don't allow this. Things that like, it's cool that we can generate our OpenAPI spec if we have a standard OpenAPI REST endpoint, and then use that to generate the hooks in React. By the way, if you haven't seen, OpenAPI has a TypeScript generator. There's the OpenAPI TypeScript that lets you point this package at a OpenAPI v3 spec and schema, and it will generate the types. There was a really, really awesome change that got merged recently. Change is probably not the right word for it. Here, OpenAPI React Query. This particular dev, who I didn't contribute before, Martin Pocket, contributed an OpenAPI TanStack query React query binding. So now you can use the OpenAPI fetch helper, the OpenAPI TanStack query helper he made for the client, and create a type-safe API client for your OpenAPI backend. Now you'll get the type errors, you'll get the definitions, you'll get everything here, but you don't get the command click. And that's the catch. This gets you the safety you get from TRPC. And to get that when using an OpenAPI spec instead of having to use TypeScript on your backend, that's huge. This is an achievement. This is awesome. And so many projects should certainly be using this. But it doesn't go as deep as TRPC does. And I want to emphasize the difference here, where this, you say, use query, get users. And it's cool you can do that. But here, I type in api.image.getPaginatedImages. These are all keys on the thing. If I type API dots, I have the different things on here. Image is the important one. Copy image, get latest, and get paginated images. I have all of these endpoints effectively here that I can just press. And now I know all the things I can do with it. Use query. And now I know what this is going to respond with. It returns an ID, user ID, this whole type here. That is magical. And what's going on here is so much better than it was before, but it is generated code. It is using the schema to generate types. So if you were to command click things here, it would bring you to a generated type definition file, not to the original source. But this gets you a lot of the like safety and aesthetic, so to speak. I almost want to say like outside and inside DX. Like the outside DX, the thing you see, the thing you write, and the thing you look at is the same. But the actual thing you interface with and interact with when you use your editor, that part's a little bit different. I wanted to call it the distinction there because I think it's important. And I think what Cody is bringing up here is very valuable.
It's small stuff like that where it's like, I would rather just use JSX because it just works better.
JSX deserves a lot less shit than it gets. It makes these types of things so easy. The fact that we can just write what is effectively HTML inside of a JS file and get all our type safety, get all our benefits, be able to go back to JavaScript here for like a ref binding. It's a weird example because I'm doing scroll auto fetching stuff here. But the fact that it's that easy to do these types of things is awesome. It's a good thing.
So some other complaints. When I was using Temple, I found that when I navigated between pages, sometimes the Temple proxy, which is something I'm using to basically force my browser to reload when I save a Temple file or when I save a Go file. I'm using Temple generate watch with this proxy, and that is basically treating like a live reload. Sometimes this whole thing would just block up my tab. Like my Chrome tab would freeze up, and I have to close it, and then I have to open a new one.
I've had this in a couple stacks before. It is the worst. Having your Chrome tab freeze and just dealing with your browser not behaving as expected because you made a change and then it doesn't fix itself. It's the most annoying thing. I've run into that with every language I've worked with, but it's particularly rough in things that aren't as considerate of the browser. I don't think the amount of work that went into doing HMR and like hot reloading and live reloading stuff in the browser gets enough credit, because the amount of work it took to make all the crazy hot module reloading stuff in React function properly, that was a huge thing that Dan Abramov put a lot of his time into, the fast reload stuff. And the magic of saving something in your editor and just seeing the difference in the browser is something a lot of tech stacks still don't have. In fact, to get it working here, he had to set up a proxy that would allow for an additional JavaScript file to be loaded into the browser that would detect when a change happened and then reload accordingly. That's not built into the stack. That's something he had to roll himself effectively, and that is tough. And the result is that it's buggy and doesn't work great. And that just sucks. We've largely solved these types of problems in the React world, as I'm sure he says here.
I opened an issue on the Temple GitHub. I believe that's been fixed by the maintainer of Temple. But it's just like enough of running into these little small issues where you're like, okay, there's another tick off the box why I don't want to use this. Granted, if someone else ran into that bug and this got fixed before I picked it up, maybe I wouldn't be so frustrated with it. But if you run into enough frustrations with trying out a stack, you're like, I just don't care about this stack anymore. The great thing about Next.js and Vite and all these other things is that like typically they've done a very, very good job just making the hot module reloading work perfectly fine. Like with Next.js, I save a file and typically I go back to my UI and it's automatically refreshed. By the time I switch screens, my page is already refreshed with my change. Granted, I could just have a bad setup, but again, like that's another problem with using these type of stacks is that you end up like hacking all these things together yourself.
It's funny that like one of the biggest complaints that I hear about the JavaScript ecosystem is that you have to apply so many different things. You have to like add all these different parts from all these different places. You have to install so many packages to use React. Look at all the shit he had to do just to make like the editor experience not terrible. And it's still not as good as Next is by default. That is a notable thing, and I'm really happy that he called that out. I really liked this tweet. I don't know what the people hyping up HTMX are trying to build, but simple things such as re-enabling a button when I click back in my browser do not work out of the box using HTMX and HTMX indicators. Maybe it's a bug, maybe it's a skill issue. I'm starting to think this is actually a meme. So the example he gave here is actually really interesting, where if we play it, we have this field, he's putting a password in, logs in. Now the login button state is broken when he goes back because it pushed the new URL and now the state of the last page is broken. An example he gives in the replies here that's pretty brutal is that HX redirects cause a fun issue where the button becomes clickable again after the render happens. So the order of events here is you submit the password, it shows the loading state when that's happening, the server responds with a redirect, and since the server responded, it no longer shows the loading state, So it shows you the login button again for a bit, and then it goes to the next page, which is really jank. He ended up linking a GitHub issue that was relatively old. I think I just saw it a second ago here. He made a PR where he fixed this, where indicators were coming back before the redirect finished. Let's see this video. Yeah, this is the one I remember. So submits a password, it loading states, then it goes green again while it loads the redirect. That is terrible. That is a terrible user experience. And the fact that that's effectively a bug in how HTMX works, where loading states aren't during a redirect. The loading state only works for that specific post request. That sucked. And it's sad that like this type of thing is the default experience when you use HTMX. But he made a custom build that fixed this, where it will leave the loading state until the redirect is complete. I hope they merge this PR because that feels like a huge miss. And there's a bunch of these types of things. And there was a really good tweet from Ryan Florence about this, where Cody had said the longer he plays with Go and HTMX, the more he wants to go back to Next. Ryan replied, lower your UX ambition and then you'll love it. And the HTMX guy replied here, he's right, you know. Yeah. If you're okay with those types of bugs, if you're okay with a loading button re-enabling itself before the redirect happens, if you're okay with those little types of jank, and you really don't want to use React and JavaScript and modern web tools and technologies, that's totally fine and awesome. I'm not trying to discount the people who are okay with that. I'm trying to say that modern web tools and technologies exist for a reason, and it's that those types of issues are so much easier to fix when you actually own and ship client-side JS. There's values and costs to all of these approaches. When you get used to being able to fix user experience issues because you own the user experience, you end up getting frustrated when you run into these things. And I know this has happened to me a lot. Whenever I use a website where the button states change multiple times before it goes where they're supposed to go, it frustrates me to no end. And this is very common in things like Rails and the Turbo stuff that they do over there. So it's also very common in something like GitHub, which is almost entirely broken for these types of issues. Yeah, I very much sympathize with that point as well as the point here. The promise of you don't need all these packages, you can just use the language, as he's shown here in the video, is a lie. And the promise that you can make experiences just as good as React, I've also shown is a lie. That doesn't mean you can't make good experiences. It doesn't mean the standard library in Go isn't good. It just means that the quality we have grown to expect is not achieved unless you make very similar compromises. There's values and there's negatives with all of these systems. And he's done a great job of giving meaningful exploration to the Go side before going back to Next after learning what he's learned.
Well, one thing that started to annoy me a lot is how rigid the package system is in Go. And what I mean by that is that like it feels very rigid that the package you're in has to match the directory that you're in.
This drove me mad the little bit I was playing with Go recently. The rigidity of how you name things and how everything has to be a package is weird.
Okay. I tried to do like a file-based route approach here where I'd have like a dashboard page, a login page, a logout page, an unsubscribe page, stuff like that. And inside the dashboard page, I'm like, well, I just want to go ahead and just put a couple of like components inside a subfolder so I can easily find them when I'm just like navigating this. But when you do that, you're forced to basically make these be in a package that like matches the name of the folder. And then you have to like remember, well, you have to make this public because although this is a dashboard only component, you got to make it public so that I can actually import it from another page or route that lives on my dashboard. And so,
oh, I hate this type of thing. This is a thing that I hated about unit testing. I felt like when I was unit testing things that shouldn't be tested, I often had to make a bunch of things exported in public just so I could access them and change them, when previously I would have just left them all private. There have been many times where I made my code less safe or less accurate, or even just made it slightly misleading, simply so I could have the code be testable. And that seems like similar to how this happens here. Yeah, I hate Go as a language so much. It's not that, but like if you look at Go as a spec sheet, all the things it does and enables, it's incredible. But my actual experience writing it and interfacing with it has been so much less so. And also Python imports are a pain. This is one of those things you don't realize if you spend your whole life in JavaScript. Other languages' import stories are kind of rough, to put it lightly. And this is one of those things that you don't realize until you dive into Go for a while. And he's doing a great job of showing how much pain and mental model shifting you have to do just to split things up into multiple files.
So I feel like the packaging system is very strict or rigid in the sense that like you have to basically either put everything in the same folder or you just basically do what I just did and like you have to like make some stuff public. And then you find yourself going through here and just like changing the capital case of all this stuff as you're moving stuff around. And it just feels like busy work versus, I don't know, it just feels a lot more flexible in TypeScript and Node where like I can just import that thing. Like here's a function, I just want to import it from this file that lives who knows where. I don't care. Just give me that file. That's all I want to invoke. And then if I want it to be a private module or a private function, I literally just don't export it, so that everything in this file can have access to that. So that's kind of something that I miss about Node. But again, that's just more of a mindset shift. I have to get used to how Go works with packages and stuff. And it's kind of like, well, you just have to do it that way. That's just how it works. Overall, when it comes to Go, my final opinions are, if you came to me and said, hey, Cody, we need you to build the most performant backend you can do, how would you do it? Don't worry about the front end. You never have to touch front end code again. I would pick Go. Honestly, I would still pick Go. I think having this type of strict language where everything is typed and you have like these built-in constructs for doing channels, it just has a better concurrency model than Node.js in my opinion. Like in another video I just did, the
better parallel. The concurrency in JavaScript is pretty unmatched, but if you want to actually run multiple things at the same time, Go is really good for that.
The other day I kind of talked about node workers, and node workers are just like a nightmare compared to like pushing to a channel, right? It's just so convenient and elegant in Go of like, I just need to do some work on a queue here, just push into a channel that'll get
workers suck. I'll cave there. Absolutely agree.
Picked up by some other process, and it's just nice. So like I said, if you came to me and said you are in charge of like building out a complete REST API or this backend microservices, you don't ever have to worry about a front end and you're on a larger team, I would say Go is probably a really good choice. But if you said, hey, Cody, you're a one-man team, I need you to work on 3 different projects, and I need you to context switch between them, possibly multiple times a day, that's when I'm like, okay, I'm probably going to pick Next.js or some type of all-inclusive framework that uses TypeScript on the front end and the back end.
Okay, I love this point. This is really good. Something we don't talk about anywhere near enough is context shifting. If your job is just doing backend and servers, and you're working on multiple backend servers and packages, and they're all in Go, and they're all structured the same way, Go is actually an awesome language for that, because Go is so consistent. I almost feel like a monkey when I'm writing Go, because it's so repetitive and verbose and consistent. It's like I'm doing the same thing over and over. But that's a good thing when you're hopping between projects and they're all backend projects, they're all using the same package, they're all written in Go. It's easy to context shift between those. But if you have to go do a thing on the front end, if you have to go change the way this button appears or change the behavior of this like field that we just got back from the back end, and you're context shifting between front end and back end, then it can get real rough. So it's important to think about the context of the stuff that you work on. Like, are you working entirely between 4 different backends that are architected the same way? Are you just working on one thing constantly? Or are you working on 3 different full stack projects? I know that sounds like obviously at a big company, you're just gonna be working on the one backend or the one front end. No. When I was at Twitch, I was hopping between 3 different full stack projects all of the time. We had the Twitch Studio app, which was an Electron app that happened to use the core web site as part of its rendering engine. So I was between those a bunch, and they had a lot of overlap, so that was fine. And then we had an internal tool called Aegis, which was the safety internal operations tool for when you report somebody on Twitch. And that was originally a really messy Rails app, and we rewrote it to be Go backend, GraphQL as the interface, and then React front end, so that it was as similar to the experience we were having working on the core site. I put a lot of effort in to make it so the context shifting between these different things was as minimal as possible. But since I was working between these 3 different full stack projects, where the Electron app was the React front end and the Electron, so to speak, back end, we had the core website, which was the React front end and SPA, and then a massive GraphQL edge that had like 15 plus different code bases it was interfacing with. And then we had Aegis, the internal safety tool, that was a React single page app front end, and a minimal Go backend that was entirely owned by us. And I was shifting between all of these different things and all of these different parts of these stacks. And the more that we had them be consistent, the more productive we could be. But since we had the huge GraphQL in the middle, shifting from backend to front end tended to be harder than shifting from project to project. And a lot of people work at jobs where they're shifting between the stack up and down, and they're shifting between projects left and right. And if you can pick a language that minimizes how big that shift is, or you can pick a tech stack that makes it easier to make those shifts, it makes you way more productive. The biggest loss of time that most developers experience is context shifting. There have been studies on this, and it takes like up to an hour once you lose track of what you're doing or you have to change what you're doing. It can take up to an hour to hit peak productivity again. And if it's less work to switch between these things, you'll find yourself being much more productive. There's another YouTuber who you guys might know because he helps manage my channel now. Huge shout out to Ben Davis. Ben did an awesome video that I've wanted to use for a while now. Yeah, why I stopped using Go. This one's nice and short. I'll leave the link in the description because I highly recommend checking this one out. Huge shout out to Ben. The TLDR for this one is that since he had the Go backend in the Svelte front end, he found that the context shifting was too much, especially when he tried SvelteKit and realized he could use the backend and the front end with the same language and shifting between them was easier. And even though there was less performance on the backend side, because he was using Go before, and that would obviously be faster, he found that moving off of Go made him so much faster that it balanced out and was worth it. Cool. Back to this.
That I know people hate TypeScript. They say that TypeScript should never run on the back end. But in my opinion, there are a lot of benefits of not having the context switch between two ecosystems. Whether you agree with it or not, but when your backend is written in Go, you then have a completely different mindset you have to think about, a different package manager, a different make files. It depends on how you're doing like your builds and your runs.
We got to the point at Twitch where we just would run the front end with a staging back end because it was easier than trying to get all the front end devs to have the whole back end spun up so they could do the full stack development themselves.
And then you have your front end that's using a completely other set of tools and ecosystem, like, I don't know, ES Build or TurboPack and Next.js and ESM modules. For me, in my brain, not having the context switch between two different languages and two completely different ecosystems is a huge win, especially if you have to maintain multiple projects at the same time and you have to switch between them often throughout the day.
Yeah, totally agree. Is GitHub actually down? I'm going to blame Rails for that. You can leave that in the video. Yeah, if only they were using modern tools and technologies. Seriously, though, things go down. It sucks. Shout out to the GitHub team. I'm sure they're on it. Something I want to riff on here about the context shifting side. One of the best arguments for something like HTMX is that it minimizes the context shifting you have to do. If your backend is already in Go or Rust or Python or something else, the amount of context shifting you have to do to go to the React code base on the front end was bigger than it should have been. With HTMX, you don't have to go as far. You don't have to leave the backend code base. You just have the HTML template right there, and then HTMX does the behavior side. The more that we can blur the line between those sides, the less shifting you have to do to go from back to front. To go back to my example here, the reason that the TRPC command click is so magical is it wipes out that barrier. The backend and front end context shift is just command click. Now I'm in the backend context. Now I'm back in the front end context. And I can go between different projects that are using this stack and have the same developer experience roughly across all of them. It's so powerful. I can switch between things with no effort, and it's great. And that's if you're working on multiple projects, be it as an indie hacker or at a company where you're touching a lot of different code bases, there's a lot of power to sharing the model between the different projects. And that's been a design goal of React from day one. The goal of React Native was never to take your websites that you wrote in React and magically port them to native. It was to allow the developers who are working on a feature to build it on the front end and build it in the app without having to learn a brand new native technology to do it. It's not write once, run everywhere. It's learn once, write everywhere. And I love that mindset. And I think it's really important. It's one of the things that the web dev and JavaScript community is indexed on really heavily is how can we minimize the amount of shifting?
Goals on this channel, and everything I do on my channel is just on the side. I just do this with some extra free time after work. I'm trying to do that whole indie hacker thing where I build a project, I try to launch it, I try to get some users. If it doesn't work, I move over to another project. Sometimes I'll work on 2 or 3 different projects in a day, and I'll just ship one feature for one product, move on to the next, ship another feature. Having a separated front end and back end is hard enough to get all set up and automated with CI/CD. And then add on top of that, your backend's in a completely different language and ecosystem. That's not complexity that I'm willing to trade off. All right, let's move on to HTMX. HTMX overall, I mean, from the get-go, I'll say no. I don't like HTMX. I think the idea is pretty cool, but I think the mental model with all these front-end frameworks like Vue, Svelte.
I'm going to do something that you as the viewer are going to hate. I know what he says here about HTMX is going to be incredible, and I know you really want to hear it. You really want to hear it. I can feel it because I want to hear it too. but you're not going to get to, because you're going to have to go to his video to hear his thoughts on HTMX. We're going to remove this part entirely from my reaction so that you have yet another reason to go support Cody. So make sure you check out his video in full if you want to hear that part.
All right, I don't even know what else to talk about. I mean, I talked about Go, I talked about Temple and how I don't like it. I talked about HTMX, how I don't like that. So at this point, I'm okay just swallowing the fact that I'm just going to become a Next.js developer. I'm just going to be a JavaScript dev. You backend devs can make fun of me for just wanting to be a JavaScript dev, but I have been coding in JavaScript for almost 10 years now in TypeScript. And at this point, I am so used to coding in TypeScript and having like end-to-end type safety and having like the flexibility to move fast. Like any package you'd ever need, like you're going to find it in React and you can probably implement it in like 30 minutes to an hour.
I just need to rant about this point he made here because it's so good. Like, he did the thing that we're always asked to do. I get told all the time, well, you wouldn't like JavaScript so much if you just used a real language. So he did. He spent a ton of time, like over a month at this point, going out of his way to give Go and HTMX as honest of an honest shot as you can give it. He even did a video about how cool the cool parts were and doing his best to like share the best parts. But now that he has went all the way through it, he has seen the bugs that exist, he's seen the experiences he can produce using these tools, he is not happy with the results. And I am petrified he's going to get flamed. I'm going to do whatever I can to support, because it is important to support somebody for doing something this bold, based and real. Seriously though, this was such a good video, and I'm pumped that you shared your whole experience with the community. Let's hear his closing arguments here.
Like, no joke. For everything in Project Planner AI, which is another application that I worked on using Next.js and Convex, everything you see in this application, literally like, oh, we need to have some Kanban board. We just went and found some arbitrary package, brought it in, and now we have Kanban functionality. Like, it took us like 30 minutes to an hour to get a basic Kanban board set up. And then we just spent a little bit more time adding like drag drop functionality. And honestly, I just don't think it's possible to achieve this level of productivity using Go or HTMX. Like, there's probably not libraries and packages already set up for you where you can just bring them in, import a module, throw in a random component somewhere, and then you have like drag and drop functionality out of the box.
To be fair, at this point, usually what you would do is you would bring in a React single page app, either as a mini piece that just loads on this page, or as the entirety of the UI, and then the backend is just serving API request responses. But at that point, the amount of work and context shifting between those things is rough enough that you might as well just use TypeScript on the backend. It's like there's the two questions of. The first is, how much do you care about the performance of the backend? If you care about it a lot, you should use something like Go. But then the other question of, how much do you care about the quality of experience on the front end? And if you care about that, you should use React and TypeScript or some client-side thing. If you care about both, then use Go on the back end and React on the front end. If you only care about the user experience and the dev experience, use React and Next.js for everything. If you only care about the backend experience, the performance, and the love of Go that you have, use Go plus HTMX. But there's like a diagram I could do here. So, quick chart to describe my takeaway here and the point I'm trying to emphasize. If you separate this as the backend performance and the front end user experience and developer experience, now we have to think, how much do we care about these things? I'm going to use the SVGL helper because this is a lifesaver. React. Obviously, if you care about the front end experience, something like React probably makes a lot of sense. So I'll even put that in both of these. You can use any other, you can replace it with any front end library that you prefer. It can be Svelte, it can be whatever. But using React or something like it on the front end, if you care about the front end user experience, you basically have to. It is impossible to make as good of a user experience without a front end technology as it is to make one with a front end technology. That's a fact. It could be Solid, it could be Vue, it could be Svelte, it could be anything, but you need JavaScript on the client that you own as the developer to have both a good user experience and developer experience on the front end side. If you just care about the performance of the backend, you want it to be as efficient as possible, then Go makes a lot of sense in the same way. And look at that. Now we have Go on both sides here, where if you care about the user experience of the front end and you care about the performance of the back end, here you go. There's your solution. Use React for the front end and Go for the back end. The catch here is that you have to do a lot more work to create the binding between these parts, but you have made the decision that you're okay with that because you don't want to compromise on back end performance and you don't want to compromise on front end experience. If you don't care as much about the user experience, but you really want to use a performant backend, HTMX, great solution. If you don't care as much about the performance of your server, you're willing to like use Lambda, or you're okay with responses taking longer sometimes, and you're okay with the memory footprint, you're okay with using JavaScript on the backend, then use Node. In this case, I would recommend using something that's full stack, like Next.js, SvelteKit, something like that. So I'm going to put Next.js here. And then importantly, if you don't care about any, then who cares at all? I think this will help a lot of people understand the values and the negatives of any given one of these solutions. This is going on Twitter, and people are going to be real mad at me for it, and I don't care. I'm right. Yeah, this won't blow up in my face at all. Anyways.
When you have state, and then you have actions that derive the view from that state, it's such an easier mental model to like implement nice, sophisticated UIs. Oh, we can even swap between tables and cards just by clicking a button. I'm not saying that you can't implement this with Go and HTMX and Temple. I'm just saying I have not found a stack out there that gives me the same level of productivity as Next.js does and React does and this whole ecosystem that I've been using on my channel for a while.
Yep, you put it perfectly. The level of productivity as well as the level of experience users can have that you get from something like full stack, Next.js T3 stack, server actions, SvelteKit, all these solutions is really hard to beat.
I tried using Laravel earlier this year. There's a whole like fiasco about Laravel. I made fun of it and I decided to try it out. And then I ended up just missing TypeScript. I ended up missing my auto completion of my editor, my end-to-end type safety. I felt like the IntelliSense was not good. Again, the recommendations were, well, you should stop using VS Code and switch over to something else.
The fact that the recommendation for his Go experience being bad was you should use something else instead, that should say everything you need to hear about the quality of experience being provided in these other ecosystems. Like, that's awful. I feel genuinely bad.
It's like, I don't want to have to learn a new editor just to use your stack. Like, Laravel is pretty cool. I would say Laravel has a bunch.
Okay, apparently it's the same quality of experience in NeoVim. They're just being annoying. Yeah, still the same language. That's what I thought. That's why I was confused about that comment. But yeah, fair points. Thank you all.
Bunch of baked-in functionality, which can be very appealing to a lot of people. But I don't know. I just like the flexibility of like, I want to install some random ORM package and not have to use what Laravel prescribes me. And when I say I tried Laravel, like I legit cloned or I forked Coolify. I made a pull request. I tried to fix some functionality with the registration page. I made this pull request and it got merged. And I'm actually excited about that. Andres, who shout out to him for doing Coolify, like this is a really cool product. He says he's not even aware of the old function I used. So it's like, I picked up Laravel in a day or two, and I'm using stuff that the person who's maintaining this project doesn't even know about. And I'm not saying that to like bash Andres. I'm saying that to say that I'm not just like saying, oh, I tried Laravel. Like I legit read through the documentation. I learned some stuff. I applied it to the UI that I was trying to fix. And overall, I mean, it's just like, it works. It's not for me. Another project I tried forking and playing around with was Techromancy's 00. This is an emailer that I kind of talked about on my project before. He's using Elixir. I read through this. I tried to play around with it. The Elixir syntax is just very interesting. Like, just something about it.
I love the Elixir. Is he going to shit on Elixir here? This is going to hurt me. I'm scared.
I tried to play around with it. The Elixir syntax
is
just very interesting. Like, just something about it I just don't like. I guess what I'm getting at is over the past like month or so, I've been trying to push into different directions of like, let's try a little bit of Laravel. Let's try a little bit of Elixir. Let's try a little bit of Go. Let's try a little bit of HTMX and Temple.
I don't necessarily like that he's using little bit because he's giving most of these things a really honest shot. Like he built a whole service with Go and HTMX. He built a whole service with Hano and HTMX. He's really trying these. It's not like I dicked around for a few hours with the thing. He's filing pull requests on legitimate Coolify projects and learning things the maintainer didn't even know about. It's huge. I have so much respect for how Cody has done these things. Let's let him have his outro. And then we'll wrap up. And once again, if you want to hear the whole rant, you want to hear everything he has to say, go watch it on his channel. And you should definitely subscribe to him as well because he makes awesome deep dive content like no one else on the platform.
And at the end of the day, it's like, I'm kind of done trying new stuff. Like I've just come to palate the fact that I'm just a Next.js JavaScript developer and I'm able to ship stuff very fast with it. And I'm okay with that. And that's what I'm going to stick with. And I'm going to stop wasting your time switching between various stacks. And I'm going to go back to what I know and what I enjoy and what I actually love coding with, and that is TypeScript and JavaScript. So sorry for wasting your time and hyping you up on Go if you guys got excited, but I'm going to switch back to my normal scheduled content. Maybe I'll do some Go stuff once in a while. Like this isn't the first adventure time I've done with Go. If you scroll back, I was doing like a distributed key value store with Go a long time ago. and played around with that for about 2 weeks. And I learned a little bit about Kubernetes and stuff. So yeah, I don't know what I'm even saying at this point. Hope you guys enjoyed watching. Have a good day. Happy coding. And yeah, let's just get back to Next.js and actually shipping stuff.
That was phenomenal. Once again, huge shout out to Cody for putting the time into this. There aren't many creators that are willing to like give these things an honest shot, put out the video that he did before, and then follow it up with something like this. I loved this. And if you do too, please go give him some support, a sub, and a nice comment. That's all I got. Until next time, peace, nerds.